Good rainy morning. Welcome to Rebarchek University. From Canada to Germany, thanks for joining me. As the Pope of Podcasting, I take your download seriously, but I especially take your intellect seriously. What's I's got for yous today? Well, first a prayer of blessing, and then because I feel like I've been hit by a bolt of lightning, I'm going to interrupt my current series to offer some reflections on the year 2020. It was a year that saw America make an enormous swerve off the paved highway. Yeah, a lightning bolt struck me. What was it? A New York Times email news feed on the general righteousness of 2020.
Aye, smacked me in the head it did.
First, a few remarks about my team. Danielle and Chris, Kareth, Jessica and Nathan down in Remember the Alamo land? Joe over in Crossroads of America? Katie down in Roasting Tucson? Donka! It's true. I'm so appreciative of all you Patreon supporters. I couldn't and wouldn't produce the podcast without you. So again, my gratitude.
Excuse me, Professor Yu. I think it's pronounced Tucson.
My listener, want to stand behind a reluctant prophet? One crying into the wilderness? You do? Well, go to Patreon and make a monthly $20, $30, or $40 pledge. Not only is that a way to support a bald theologian, it's a way to get involved in Christian mission. You've probably seen it. The Fed keeps raising the interest rates to try to quell inflation, but it's not working. Not even. One key indicator, home sales. Yeah, according to the National Association of Realtors Index, home sales fell 7.1% in August. Mortgage rates are now above 7%. Mortgage rates haven't been this high since 2002.
Kilk, that's almost 4 decades.
Well, okay, Goofy. But the high interest rates not only affect new home buyers, they hang a millstone on folks who want to move, who want to flee laterally elsewhere. They too are stymied by the crushing expense. And it's not just mortgages. Wages are going down exactly when prices are going up. The Heritage Organization reports that coffee is up 21% since 2021. Heating your home, that's gone up 63% since January 21. Electricity, up 22%. A gallon of gas has exploded. It's up 54% since 2021. Now, I'm happy to report that I've discovered a coping mechanism. Yeah. Each time I go to the grocery store, I carry with me my own pair of defibrillation paddles.
Really? That's clever.
Thanks, ma'am. I even put a I Heart Jesus sticker on the box.
You're so Christian.
Yeah, I walk up, unload my plastic basket, and while the cashier begins to ring me up, out of my backpack I pull the pair of paddles and the generator that goes with it, and I bought all that online. And while she's ringing me up, I explain to her how the electrified paddles work. And then, when she announces my total of $114, $114 for the 9 items I purchased? A tub of oatmeal has more than doubled over the last 4 years. When she announces my total, I hand her my defib paddles. I immediately collapse on the cold cement floor and wait for her to apply the paddles to my chest and shock me back to consciousness.
I heard that.
It's that bad. With all that in mind, my listener, let me pray for God's provision in your life. Our Father, whose glorious throne is in heaven, we praise your name. As hard as life can be, we're alive. Thank you for the gift of life. Thank you for healthy lungs, hearts that pump blood, eyes to see, arms with which to hug. And still, Abba, even Jesus prayed, give us our daily bread. Ultimately, we depend on your grace. So today, Holy Spirit, I pray for each and every listener. Open the floodgates of provision, Lord. Provide for their basic, essential economic needs. Bring in helps for medical bills, for unexpected and unplanned for expenses. A blown tire, a tooth with a cavity, a leaky roof. You, eternal God, own the cattle on 1,000 hills, so we come to you as the Lord and owner of all creation. Meet our need. Come through for us, King Jesus. Make a way for my listener. Show them that you're still in the miracle working business. Amen, amen, amen. Hey, one of those quick businessy thing? My recent 3 months of videos are loading to Edmund Rebarchek's YouTube page, not the YouTube page. So if you're interested in the video version of the podcast, go for now go to YouTube at Edmund Rebarchek. I'm so dumb. I'll get that fixed, but I'm such a technological clod. Okay, 2020 in the rearview mirror. Last week I opened up a New York Times e-newsfeed article by David Leonhardt about the year 2020. He said, and I'm going to paraphrase his article, that while progressivism has made some imprint on Americans' institutions, universities, Hollywood, and the national media, he said it mostly has failed. Progressivism, Leonhardt lamented, has not much impacted the average Jane on the street's life. True, the elites, politicians, actors, professors, have bought into the glories of progressivism, but specifically, for instance, he noted variously that universities are now captured by identity politics. Blacks are highlighted more now by media organizations. He said that 81 million Biden did go and make June 19th a holiday. And then he said that it was good to see that prestigious cultural awards now are consistently doled out to diverse folks. Oh man, me interrupting Leonhardt here for a minute. I still chortle when I think back to Barack Obama having won the Nobel Peace Prize only 12 whole days after the inauguration. 'Twas a move that 100% totally delegitimized the Nobel Peace Prize for decades to come. 12 days? President Bush's White House staffers hadn't even finished taking down the Bush family portraits 12 days in. And imagine if the Nobel Peace Prize had waited 3 whole months. I mean, they would have just donated the entire organization to his honor. Oh, the craziness. But back to the article. The problem is, Leonhardt went on, progressivism hasn't been strategic enough. Hasn't done enough to shape life for America's common schlubs. Mostly, he agonized, progressivism has been limited to shaping the symbolic over the concrete. Now, it was fascinating to read him sharing so openly about how progressivism is, or is not to his mind, shaping life here in the United States. And the kicker, the bolt of lightning, is when he added, quote, the spirit of 2020 was always a righteous spirit. And the people and organizations that powered that moment had legitimate grievances and moral demands, end quote. You guys, I read that line and I thought, wow, now there's a thought piece for my show. 2020 was always a righteous spirit, driven by legitimate moral demands. Queso sagrado. So yes, indeed, let's look in the rearview mirror at what happened and why in 2020, and why that has in significant ways birthed a new church. Think with me, my listener. Just why is progressivism so popular to what now? Some 50% of all Christians? 'Cause me? I realize that the world spirit will always just be the world spirit, but it really concerns me when self-avowed Christians throw in with wokeness, with godless progressivism. So again, it's been 3.5 years since the foment broke out in March of 2020. Let's look back at the what's and whys. Now, I'm not going to rehearse all of that year. I'll merely note up front that there were earthquakes, assassinations, volcano eruptions, sports cancellations, whole seasons were canceled, basketball, tennis, baseball, golf. We had the Me Too movement, a Ukrainian jet crash that killed 176 people at once. International travel bans, the Olympics were postponed, there were national lockdowns, locust invasions, and, if you're 12 years old, you'll care about this one, Brock Lesnar lost WrestleMania 36. But let's summarize the events of the epic year 2020 this way. It was an election year. An election year where the polarizing Donald Trump was at issue. COVID broke early that winter. People were fear-porn to the gills. The entire medical industry was thrown into disarray, and people no longer knew whom to allow into their own homes. Then we had the drug addict and convicted felon George Floyd. He had pointed a gun at a pregnant woman. He'd been rung up several times on cocaine charges. And even the Washington Post, no, not the New York Post, but the liberal Washington Post wrote of Floyd, from the day George Floyd moved to Texas as a child to the day he was killed in Minneapolis, the police were omnipresent in his life. End quote. In 2020, George Floyd was killed and memorialized, of all places, at an Assemblies of God college. You can't make this stuff up. So there was a media fomented outrage at not only the police brutality, but authority in general. Statues were being toppled, which is always a Marxist mainstay. Burn down history, right? And cities were enduring rioting, looting, burning, and the turning of entire business districts into economic deserts. Thank you for that phrase, David, economic deserts. That was happening because of all the aforementioned rioting and looting. It was, to put it mildly, a catastrophic year. A major cultural earthquake. I was doing an entire series in the midst of 2020. I called it The Cult of the Now. I did 16 episodes on that. And my only regret, that I did not enough call it a neo-Marxist cult. I focused too much on the historic Marxist roots of what was being vomited out onto the national landscape, and not enough on the novel features, but whew, what a year. And before I get to the rub, the nexus of today's show, I'll just say that the progressivism of 2020 actually has deeply impacted this bald-headed schlub of a Spudlander. To your belief that wokeism hasn't gone far enough, Mr. Leonhardt? I lost friends. I've had former, warm, respectful, committed Christians scold me and defriend me on Facebook. I've lost connections with extended family. Yeah, a couple of them accuse me of vile things. We hardly even know each other, and they come and accuse me of vile stuff. And then, closer to home, I am actually quite self-censoring about what I post on my own social media accounts, and even what I say on my show. I don't want the FBI breaking through my door at 2 a.m. in the morning. I don't want to be arrested for conspiring against the government by asking questions. I don't want to be even put on the radar for wrong speak or gulp, wrong thought. But that's not all what 2020 did to me, and I'm not going to bore any New York Times readers with further how 2020 has altered my worldview. 2020, more importantly to me, caused an enormous ecclesial shift. A shift that, last week in show 330, I described it as like unto the 16th century Reformation. You guys, entire denominations are being torn a new one. Even though most of those are pretending it is not happening, even though most ecclesiarchs refuse to reflect openly about how the government-mandated lockdowns have brutalized their churches. And even though most refuse to strategize about what they'll do the next riotous time around. And people, good, thoughtful, Bible reading, church going, morally upright, love your neighbor, people, do right by your family, folks, nice, oh, above all else, nice. Those kind of people have turned on traditional Christianity. Weirdly, and probably without knowing it, they've entirely turned against biblical Christianity. What on earth has happened? A neo-Christianity has arisen. An after-Christ has arisen. A post-biblical Christianity has been born. And with all that, we now live in a post-truth world. A post-truth Christianity has been delivered, kicking and screaming and bleeding onto the birthing table of history. And we're watching. It comes with its own dogmas, its own definitions of love and peace and salvation and the meaning of life. It's newly wired. It's wired in ways not seen inside the church ever before. And you know this, my listener, it comes with all the self-righteousness. All the self-righteousness of a new sect. If you study church history across 2 millennia, sects were always at odds with the mainstream church, the time-proven church. And it gets messy, and I would argue on behalf of the sect some of the time. But across history, sects insists on their distinctions, on their new moral righteousness. And these post-2020 ecclesial sects, they are red hot at the 2 millennia old church, and I mean red hot. And that self-righteousness, that moral imperiosity belonging to a moral cause, it is deeply alluring, attractive.
Me? Just by my feelings? I don't have to get off my couch and I can be part of a new moral consciousness? That's dope.
People are drawn like ants to peanut butter. To think of what's going on in my garage right as I'm speaking. We've killed 18 mice in our garage the last 3 weeks. Those old Victor traps with peanut butter on them. That's what you get when you live near thousands of acres of farmland. You get mices. People are drawn out of their banal lives to a curated cause like ants are drawn to peanut butter, like mice are drawn to peanut butter. A moral cause? A historic cause? Mucho gusto.
That's as savory as Cracker Barrel.
How'd it happen? Epic national emotionalism, fear-porning, hate-mongering, societal brainwashing, soul restructuring. And that was all woven through with what? For most were once sincere Christ-like emotional responses. People were asking things like, where's the love in all this? Who's looking out for the dispossessed in all this? How can this be happening? And again, I think the majority of those who have fallen in for today's post-2020 neo-Christianity were folks who truly meant well. And given the abject silence of church leaders in and through and after the year 2020...
Wait, I'm still processing. Did you really say that an Assemblies of God college hosted George Floyd's memorial service? Bloody hell!
No, I didn't make that up. Where there are vacuums, things will rush in to fill them. Given no pastoral cues from the pulpit how to process the epic events of 2020, given no pastoral cues from church leaders and bishops and superintendents and so forth, tens of millions of church folk readily took their cues from culture. And apparently they agreed that the police are evil, or Actually, you are selfish and ugly if you don't wear a mask while riding in your car. Or, what would Jesus do? Prefer others over himself and get an injection, or 2 or 3 if that makes others feel better? People agreed with the raging sentiment then that maybe I am a closet racist. Maybe without knowing it, without ever having thought about it, maybe I am a closet homophobe. I mean, everyone else feels I am. People thought to themselves, maybe the Bible was wrong. O.M. God. Maybe the Bible was, as it turns out, wrong? You see, you guys, warped ideas and questions rush in to fill the reason vacuum that was created by overwrought emotionalism. And that happens especially when no in-the-moment wisdom is offered. Given the abject silence of church leaders, Protestant, Catholic, Eastern Orthodox, oh, what's going on in the Catholic Church? I talked about it last week, but I read more yesterday. It is absolutely soul-destroying. Given the abject silence of church leaders through 2020 and now after, these otherwise good-hearted folks were overwhelmed by the fear-porning and emotionalism of the events of 2020. And so what happened? They flipped. They've embraced neo-Christianity. It's a new Christianity. We're in the middle of a 16th century Reformation. Here's the dealio. I see it and sense it and encounter it all over social media from folks I once knew as committed Christians. Here's what they're saying. Could the Bible be wrong? Maybe the Bible was just its own culture-bound text when it said that sexual intercourse outside of marriage is a violation of God's will, right? Maybe Jesus never actually taught anything contrary to homosexual relations, right? Maybe the Bible, golly, just like my urban pastor put it, maybe the Bible missed an enormous point by not focusing on racism. Maybe the Bible is so old that it could not offer any advice for when we're going through an election year media fear-porn hysteria? Is that possible? Oh, you see, my listener, these formerly committed, faithful Christians, in their hearts, they were confronted by questions. And they left the year 2020 with new perspectives. They exited that year with timely, zeitgeistian perspectives. And unfortunately, those perspectives inculcate a raging sense of self-righteousness. I'll bet you listening today have endured the seething wrath of those who have now embraced these fresh perspectives. No? But let me go back. Peter Heck, in a new Not the Bee article, writes that, quote, the road to apostasy begins with a 4-word question. Just 4 words. Did God really say? Close quote. And he goes on to talk about, did God really say humanity was created 2 sexes, male and female? Did God really say that touching little girls and boys was a violation of his commands? 4 constant words. Did God really say? Genesis 3:1. Did God really say Jesus was the only means of salvation? Did God really say that he hates sin? Apostasy, Heck writes, apostasy always starts with, did God really say? It's a matter of God's revelation. And you know this, but here's the deal. Satan operates in time-proven ways. He never utters straight-up falsehoods. He never asserts insane non-truths. There's always a tidbit of truth woven through his questions. You know this. Satan always comes in as an angel of light. He always comes asking questions that seem reasonable, timely, common sense. Your government would never lie to you, would it? Elected by the people, aren't they there to serve the people? However, two consenting people, even if they're children, however, two consenting people want to love one another is none of your business, right? Jesus would never resist getting untested injections, right? I mean, after all, he said turn the other cheek, so why wouldn't he offer up his other arm? All those questions have an element of truth, a grain of reason, a seed of love woven through them. Here's a Noza question that I've watched for 3 decades. It's deceived, good-hearted folks. Aren't the oppressed, by nature, more noble and deserving of more rights and privileges than the rest of us? I mean, really? My listener, right? Just who's in favor of oppressing still further the oppressed? But there are necessary follow-up questions to that phrase, questions that should have been asked and answered in 1,001 pulpits across the United States. Questions like, in the Bible, does God show partiality based on economics? Does God view people through the lens of class? Should we? Does God in the Bible give any indication that he views people through the lens of race? Does the Bible anywhere teach us to view one another through the lens of race? Does the Bible teach that being poor directly equates to salvation? Important questions. Or, on a yet more mundane line, questions should have been asked across 3 decades like, what if the oppressed are actually tools? What if they're tools for power brokers? What if we're watching weaponized classes by which power brokers manipulate the rest of us? Is it possible that we're being played? Oh dear, oh my gosh, is it possible that the so-called oppressed are themselves being played for someone else's gain? Could it go that deep? Such critical mindedness, asking those biblically driven questions, it reveals something resoundingly critical. 2020 was not, in fact, driven by a sense of righteousness. And I'm not saying people, millions of heartfelt Christians, didn't feel a sense of righteousness. I'm saying that 2020 was not based in righteous motives. No, it was based in deceit. At root, the narratives, all of them in 2020, were lies. To wit, COVID was not even close to being as deadly as they lied to us. The numbers were pumped up intentionally to fear porn us, well, and to steal billions of dollars. And yeah, COVID was a real infectious mess. No, it was not the horror show the media and the CDC made it out to be. There wasn't a single righteous or moral element to how the flip-flopping CDC and our politicians handled COVID. Nothing righteous. Or that there's widespread racism among whites is statistically absurd. This, like COVID, is a woke narrative used to leverage a power grab. That white people work a widespread racism, systemic racism, it's a way to muzzle the sheep, a way to brainwash school children, a way to divide. It's a demonic narrative. Not one iota about that is righteous. Or police brutality. I noted this data 3 years ago. The Washington Post reported that in all of 2019, the year preceding the summer-long national rioting, there were 25 unarmed whites and 14 unarmed blacks shot and killed by police across the United States for the entire year 2019. Those numbers are tiny compared to the number of whites who killed unarmed whites or the number of black civilians who killed unarmed blacks. And obviously, it would not be the case that all of those 39 total police killings, or those of that number, the 14 unarmed black killings, not the case that all of those police killings were unjustified. And look, in no way do I want to diminish the pain of those 14 black killings, but the last time I checked, 14 do not equate to universal police brutality everywhere. So the notion that the police are roaming the streets looking for blacks to kill is a vile bumper sticker. Not one righteous thing about it. Not one. So 2020 was a curated reality. The media curated narratives, blew up factoids, used graphic fear-porning imagery, and straight up lied, all to curate a reality from which our nation in general, and the church in particular, has yet to recover. Millions in the church have allowed their faith to be led into terminal absurdity. The media curated the COVID hysteria. The media curated the police brutality hysteria. Curated the lying narrative that it was pure and legitimate election processes we watched. Those were all lies. 2020 driven by a righteous spirit and legitimate moral concerns? That couldn't be more of a demonic lie. Allow me to be theological for a moment. Righteousness presupposes a fixed center, established definitions of good and evil, holy foundations by which good and evil are assessed. But wokeism? It's a cult, as I said, of the now. The definitions and foundations shift monthly, if not weekly. Actually, it's impossible for it to be righteous, since it not only does not believe in evil, but hates the very God who is the source of all righteousness, the standard against which evil is measured. Look, an emotional response is not righteous if the thing it is responding to is itself a lie, right? A mom is not righteous if she spanks her toddler for something that the toddler didn't do, even if what she felt the toddler didn't do was evil. A family's not righteous if it shoots their Doberman for presumably having killed the family Siamese, even if the family dearly loved the now dead family cat. Emotions are not themselves righteous. They are righteous when they respond to factual evil. But a curated evil, that's not righteous. A curated mob hysteria, I'm sorry, Virginia, even millions of people can collectively be wrong. And 2020, it showed us that tens of millions can, in unison, lose their minds. And worse, oh holy God, they can lose their Christian faith. Thank you so much for thinking with me. Thanks for allowing me to interrupt my scheduled series. God bless you. Until next week, please everyone go and turn on your beautiful God-given brains.